Well, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Continuing Education Committee meeting. The time is 12:01 p.m. Date is October 6th, 2022. This meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Continuing Education Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Thursday, October 6, 2022, and as stated, the time is 12:02. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the committee taking any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. And Dr. Adams, will you please take the roll?
Yes. Dr. David Paris.
Present.
Lawrence Adams, present. Dr. Pamela Daniels.
Present.
We have a quorum, all accounted for.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 2, review and possible approval of the May 7th, 2021 and February 9th, 2022 Licensing and Continuing Education Committee meeting minutes. I'd like to open this item for discussion amongst the board members. Are there any questions, comments, or changes to the May 7th, 2021 or February 9th, 2022 meeting minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes of the May 7th and February 9th meetings respectively.
This is Sabina. Can I chime in real quick? And can I just add that it's May 7th, 2021 and February 9th, 2022.
What did I say?
Noted.
Thank you.
What did I say, 2022 for both?
I think it was me in my motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there wasn't a year in the motion. I just want to make sure clear for our minutes.
Thank you for that.
So I'll amend my motion to clarify that the May 7th, 2021 and February 9th, 2022 minutes be approved.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Well, I wasn't there, so I can't, I believe.
You can second if you would like, even if you weren't present. It's a motion just to approve the minutes as a record of those meetings.
Okay, it was my understanding. Okay, I second it.
Thank you. Hearing no discussion from the board members, moderator, would you please open this agenda item for public comment?
Certainly, we are opening up the Q&A feature of WebEx for public comment. If you have any comment on the meeting minutes from either of those meetings, you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen, and type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon at the bottom row of your computer screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you are on a mobile device. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak and will have a 30-second warning. I'll give people a moment to locate that feature. And I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Adams, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion to approve the minutes?
Yes. Dr. Paris.
Yes.
Dr. Adams, yes. Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 3. Going to get an update on the board's continuing education program, and I would turn it over to Ms. Walker to provide us an update on the board CE program.
Sure, thank you. So this morning, or actually this afternoon, I'm going to begin with an update on the implementation of our Connect system as it relates specifically to the continuing education program. So this fall, we've been working on updates to enhance the user experience within the system and make it easier and more intuitive for users to navigate. We're also simplifying the renewal process for the primary DC license type by removing the current section that requires the upload of all of the CE completion certificates prior to making a payment, and instead replacing it with a simple yes or no question that's currently included in the paper renewal form. In addition, we're working on updates to the layout of the user dashboard with separate tabs, and we're adding a new section that's going to provide the ability for licensees to securely store and maintain their CE course records in that system. And in addition, it's going to provide staff with the ability to view those records when we're conducting audits, thereby eliminating a lot of the paper-based processes that we currently have. We expect this initial round of enhancements to be ready by about late November and deployed in early December. And then from there, what our plan is to build out our full offering of the continuing education functionality in the system. We began by receiving a demonstration of the existing functionality that the California Acupuncture Board has. And then we've also got access to test a test environment with the Acupuncture Board and the Board of Accountancy. So we're going in there and testing and finding functionality within those systems that works well. And then now building out our detailed documentation for our specific requirements, hoping to leverage some of that existing functionality within our system. As far as what we're looking to implement, it's going to include the new CE provider and course approval processes, and also replacing our current PDF list of approved courses with a front-facing database of all of those courses, with the ability for users to search and filter results by items such as the course title, course date, subject area, course location, and also the provider. From there, we're also going to be developing the ability for providers to upload their course completion certificates in that system directly to BCE, thereby allowing for primary source verification of a licensee's CE, and then reducing the need for licensees to manually upload and store the records themselves. All of this new CE functionality is currently in the development stage and is expected to be implemented in mid to late 2023. As far as legislation that's affecting the CE program, our Sunset Bill SB 1434 amends the board's fee schedule effective January 1st. Consistent with the findings of the board's fee study, this bill increases the fees to apply for as a CE provider to $291, the biennial renewal fee for CE providers to $118, and the fee for approval of a CE course to $116 per hour of instruction. Moving to proposed regulations that currently affect the CE unit, staff has continued its work on the approval of CE courses and distance learning regulations that were approved by the board in April. This proposal will define and differentiate between the 3 learning formats for CE courses: in-person learning experiences, live and interactive courses given via electronic means, and distance learning. This proposal will also allow licensees to complete their CE virtually if they so choose, with the exception of chiropractic adjustive or manipulation technique courses, which must be conducted through an in-person learning experience. Staff will also be returning the CE exemptions and reduction of requirements regulation to the committee for further review and discussion at the December 2nd meeting. This proposal contains specified exemptions to the annual CE requirement, and the intent is to address circumstances in which licensees have been affected by a natural disaster or a state of emergency. In addition, the committee is continuing its work on the comprehensive proposals to update the board's continuing education program. During today's meeting, the committee will be discussing the annual requirements for licensees to obtain CE credit, as well as the approval process for CE courses. Staff has also been working on reviewing their existing CE processes. So in preparation for the transition to the Connect system, staff has been conducting a comprehensive review of the existing paper-based processes to identify areas where we can improve timeframes and communication with CE providers. We plan to implement some of these changes in the coming months, and then the remainder of those changes will align with the implementation of the Connect system, as well as updates to our regulations. And the final portion of my update is just on the CE course statistics. So looking at the meeting materials, they contain a basic comparison of our CE program statistics over the past 3 fiscal years. Of particular note, last fiscal year, the board received a total of 1,967 CE course applications, which is a decrease from 2020 to 21, but in line with what we saw in fiscal year 2019-20. Staff is also working to gather and report additional metrics regarding the CE program at future committee meetings. And we're going to be looking to include statistics such as average processing timeframes and pending workload within those updates. So this time I'm happy to answer any specific questions you may have on my update on the CE program.
I had a question. On page, well, I guess it's under the CE exemptions and reduction of requirements, the CCR Title 16, Section 364. The language in there was used, provides satisfactory proof to the board. Do we have a definition of what satisfactory proof is?
We have draft language that went to the board in April where we were kind of attempting to define that proof, but it needs a little bit further refinement. Okay. That's being returned to the committee for further discussion on kind of what's going to be considered that satisfactory proof. What the concept initially began with wanting to give the board authority to issue a more broad exemption covering just a population of licensees affected. We were then advised by legal that we don't have the authority to do that. So instead we have to go, based on circumstances demonstrated by the licensee. So we've done some draft work on defining those, but it's going to be further discussed by the committee in December.
Okay, thank you.
So Ms. Walker, am I understanding the answer to that question to be the emergencies cannot be like county defined? Like if the county has a state of emergency, or if the state declares an area an emergency, was that like regionally would that like each provider in that particular area would have to apply?
That's the direction we were given from legal counsel, is that it would be the licensee themselves would have to apply for that, demonstrate the circumstances that prevent them complying with the annual CE requirement, and then the board on an individual basis would make that determination.
Thank you.
Ms. Walker, I have a quick question. I did notice in the review there, what's an update or status on the regulation that we put in towards the OAL relative to on-demand learning, changing the definition? Where's that processing now in the regulatory language and that moving forward?
Thank you. Yeah, I covered that briefly at the beginning, but we have just about ready with the package and the materials we have to create for that. The only real challenge at this point is the language itself, where it talks about the approval of the CE courses. It still contains the old the prior CE course application. So we're likely going to have to make just some minor changes to update that application process to reflect the new 3 learning experiences, because right now it's just geared towards classroom versus distance. So we have to differentiate between those 3 environments. So there may be some more minor changes coming forward, but we're close to completion on that.
Okay, so help me understand. Maybe I'm in April we kind of plucked out. I can't remember the exact, if it was C363. We plucked out that one thing to move forward. Is that what you're referring to? Because I don't remember us talking about CE applications during that. I thought that was just that one item relative to distance learning and distinguishing distance learning and live and Zoom being the same.
You're correct. Yeah. So we took that piece of it out into its own standalone package. But within the regulation that we do have for it to meet OAL scrutiny, we had to go through and define additional terms. So that was done in that language. And that's where beyond just narrowing that definition of distance learning, we had to define and differentiate between an in-person learning experience and then the live and interactive courses. And then there was additional language that was advised by legal to add in with setting the requirements for those different experiences. So everything there it's looking good. Where we're going to encounter a problem potentially, and that we're still exploring, is with the fact that that proposed language still contains the original application type that dates back to, I believe, 2010. So that application may be inconsistent with that language, given that we're defining certain language within the regulation, but we have not yet updated that application itself. So we're exploring paths forward on that, but at this time, what we would likely plan to do is eliminate or remove the form itself from the regulation, instead simply specify in the regulation what the requirements are for filing an application, which would give us probably the most efficient path forward at this point. I do also, and we'll get into it a little further later in today's agenda, but the board is also considering the updates to the course approval process. So there's the potential to almost take those pieces and catch up a bit, because we're looking at the same section. We're starting to encounter timeline issues if we try to move two concurrently. So we can either merge them or we can hold one back and continue on the path we're on.
Okay. So we can address that later, but what if things were to go forward the way they are, what's our timeline? I mean, you know, that it's April, it's now October, it's been 6 months. We thought we'd be further along, right?
Correct. Yes. My intention is to bring back what I believe is going to need to be updated directly to the board with this committee's approval in October, so we can move that piece forward, assuming that we don't make any changes further on in the agenda relating to the course approval process. But we're about there, but we may need to bring just some updated language back so we can move forward.
So if it goes to the AOL after the October meeting, then what might an approval timeframe be?
It's hard to gauge at this point, because where it largely depends on is once it goes to OAL and the notice requirement, it goes out for publication for 45 days. And during that time frame, we can receive public comments. If we don't receive public comments, or comments are generally in support of the regulation and not requesting any changes, it can be a rather faster time frame where we're looking, you know, early to mid 2023. If we get extensive public comments that we have to respond to, and then we have to issue new text, then that process ends up taking more like a year. So once we get it to the OAL, it's really dependent on the public, the public's perception of the regulation and what kind of feedback we receive at that point.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a quick question. What was the consideration, and this is just a minor question, but in the terminology for the differentiating the three learning formats, in quotes, live and interactive courses given via electronic means, and then the second one is in-person learning with the word experiences, and then the third is distance learning. Well, like the word experience is minor issue, but it seems unnecessary, so I'm wondering what the thought process there was to add that to the language.
That was at the advice of our regulatory legal counsel. So they helped us dig into the language, and they were assisting us in writing it broad enough to, when you talk about in person, what does that mean, and make sure it was inclusive enough of the different formats versus classroom or seminars, anything to that effect would be in person. So that was kind of their advised language on that.
Okay, I just found it interesting when I was reading it. It seemed like an add-on. And then finally, what's the current, do we know the current percentage of licensees that are renewing online? Right now, our utilization rate is only about 25%. So that's what's driving the need for doing the system enhancements and then streamlining the renewal process. We currently are comparable. Our closest comparable board is the California Acupuncture Board, as they're also joining us in the BISMOD project, and their
their reported rate is actually closer to 70%. So we're quite a bit behind, and that's why we're making these enhancements to really drive the use of the system.
Okay, great. Okay, I have no other questions. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or discussion by the committee members? Hearing none, moderator, would you please open this agenda item for public comment?
Certainly, we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to accommodate public comment. If you would like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon in the lower, typically in the lower right corner of your WebEx computer screen. Type the word comment and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and each person will have 3 minutes to comment. I do have a raised hand from someone logged into WebEx as Lewis Meltz. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, and then you'll have time to comment. You're unmuted.
My question is, of the number of people that, or of the vendors that submit courses for license renewal, what percentage are approved by the board? So my question is, what's the rejection rate of courses? And what are the criteria for the rejection rates so that the quality of license renewal courses is maintained at a level of consistency?
And we do have one more request for comment from someone logged into WebEx as Marcus Strutz. Mr. Strutz, I'm going to unmute you or send you a request to unmute your microphone so you may speak. And you're unmuted.
I needed some clarification on the application process where it was divided into distance learning, internet Zoom learning, and in-person learning. Is that going to be 3 separate applications and 3 separate fees at $116 an hour? That seems unreasonable and unfair in terms of it being so unbelievably expensive all of a sudden, going from 10 times as much to submit for a course. Almost all of the courses that I submit, the distance learning, the Zoom learning, and the live learning is the exact same presentation. So it makes sense that that should be one application covering all 3 of those. I wasn't quite clear on what that was happening. So if that can be responded to, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have more?
We have one more raised hand from someone logged into WebEx under the name Shasta Carey. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And you're unmuted.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to find out if we will be getting some sort of guidance on what the expectation will be as far as like the outlines that are being submitted, what the requirements will be so that we don't have to do so much back and forth on updating the outlines for approval. And that's it.
And I see no further requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I would just point to the packet for this meeting. The first question was in reference to received applications and approved and denied and withdrawn. And that information is in a table in our packet on page 3 of this agenda item. And regarding the separate fees, I would, Ms. Walker, was the intent is, would the applications have to come with a separate fee for, my understanding was courses that would maybe be both online and face-to-face, or maybe even online and face-to-face and distance?
So under the current process, courses, whether it's in an in-person classroom course or it's a distance learning course, are handled through two separate application processes. I believe that comment is very relevant to the board's discussion later, or the committee's discussion later today on that application process itself. So I would kind of defer that comment until we get to that discussion. And actually, even that third comment from Ms. Carey is also relevant to that agenda item.
Thank you. Okay, and there's no action being taken by the committee on that agenda item. So if there's no further discussion from the board, hearing none, I will move to agenda item number 4. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding the repetition of CE courses. And if I could invite Amanda Campbell from BCE staff to report on this agenda item.
Thank you, Dr. Paris. Staff are requesting the committee discuss whether changes to the board's current continuing education requirements are necessary to address licensees earning credit for repeating CE courses. The CE requirements can be found in California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 361. Licensees must complete 24 hours of CE annually to renew their license, including 2 hours of ethics and law and 4 hours in one or a combination of the 3 mandatory subject areas, which are history taking and physical examination procedures, chiropractic adjustive techniques or manipulation techniques, and proper and ethical billing and coding. Currently, when a person submits an application for reinstatement or restoration of a license, they are required to fulfill the CE requirements for each year that their license was revoked. The board has often observed that petitioners repeat the same CE courses to meet this requirement instead of completing a variety of courses. The board's current regulations don't restrict or prohibit a licensee from repeating a course multiple times for CE credit. The committee is asked to discuss this issue at today's meeting and provide feedback and direction to staff. Now, to facilitate this discussion, staff have included questions for the committee's consideration. These can be found on page 2 of this item's memo. I'll go ahead and read them aloud for any who may be listening in or called in and aren't able to see the materials. So for the first question, what should be considered a repeated course? Would the term apply only to a course taken multiple times within a single renewal cycle, multiple renewal cycles, or indefinitely? Should a licensee or petitioner be able to repeat the same CE course and receive credit for each instance they attend and participate in the course? Should a limit be imposed on the number of times a course can be repeated for credit? How would the instructions imposed on the repeating of CE courses be enforced? Should this responsibility of ensuring a licensee's compliance be placed on the CE provider, the licensee, or both? And how would this affect the individuals who apply for reinstatement of a revoked or surrendered license or restoration of a canceled license and must provide CE credit for multiple renewal cycles at one time? With that, I'll turn it back over to the committee for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So if we can, maybe I'll repeat the first question to us, and we can engage in discussion there. And if and I would defer to Ms. Knight, but if we can go through, can we go through all 4 questions, and then look for a motion and then public comment, or should we do that for each question individually?
However you would like. Maybe I would suggest maybe hitting each discussion item first, and then if you would like to entertain and hear from the public before you make a motion, you're welcome to do that as well, because something somebody says might add to your discussion or change a possible motion, or you can wait until your motion and then go out for public comment.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we'd like to hear from the public first before we entertain a motion. So if that's agreeable, thank you. So starting with question number 1, what is considered a repeated course? Would the term apply only to a course taken multiple times within a single renewal cycle, multiple cycles, or indefinitely? And Ms. Campbell and Ms. Walker, before I before we engage this discussion, are we referring to only petitioners?
No, this applies to all licensees. We just see it as more of a recurring issue with petitioners.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to the committee members for discussion.
I thought that the discussion that we had at the last meeting briefly on this made a lot of sense, in that, I mean, clearly, what prompted this is having petitioners come forward that were doing, hundreds and, sometimes up to 200 hours, depending on their time. And, doing courses, one day to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and some of them being repeated. And the benefit, of that to that individual, I think it, since we have so few petitioners, I mean, and throughout a year's time, it's not happening as much as, because most chiropractors have 24 hours. So it seems reasonable to me that, people have commented that, well, I'll take a course, once and then take it again and get something different, completely different out of it. I thought the comment that, not repeating a course more than 2 times in a renewal cycle for per chiropractor made a lot of sense, because some people want to take a course, maybe it be nutrition, or I take neurology courses sometimes a couple times just because I learn more as I repeat it. So, but as a matter of, simplicity, I think just saying that, repeating a course more than 2 times, and maybe to qualify that, a person might take a different provider because they're going to get a different take on things. So it makes more sense to say the same course with the same provider more than twice in a year, I think would be an appropriate guideline.
So was Dr. Adams, was I hearing you correctly? Initially, you mentioned like repeating a course, but and how beneficial that might be. But then I heard you state that you would not be supportive of them repeating it in the same cycle.
Yeah, I think more than twice in the same cycle. So what we experienced before when we watched these petitioners come forward is they might take, a course, the same exact course 3 times in a certain cycle, and almost within, days apart. And I think that was the concern that was really was initiated by Dr. McLean, was that you might see a course on, ethical billing, or a course on technique or something like that, and it was the same instructor, the same course, 3 or 4 days apart. So if they did it online and it was the same course, they're basically repeating the same information. So, within days of each other. And I think that the spirit of the idea was to, broaden your horizons, not be taking the same nutrition course by the same instructor online 3 times, over the course of 10 days, because you got to get your stuff in before your application goes before the board. I think that's less of an issue for chiropractors that aren't being, their license being reinstated because they're doing 24 hours a year. They might take a nutrition course in April and then take another one in October. Maybe they take the same course from the same instructor because they like that instructor and they want to review that. So I think that's appropriate, is what I'm saying, is that, but not more than twice in a cycle, a renewal cycle for that particular doctor.
Thank you.
I think even twice within a renewal cycle to get credit for that, I wouldn't want to go more than that. I feel like if it's on demand with some of the providers, you do it live and then you have access to the class afterwards. You can go back and get as much as you want from it, but to get credit, because the idea behind continuing ed is to expand your horizons, to keep your skills up, to learn different things. And so I would not be comfortable with going more than twice. I think getting credit for the one class within the single renewal cycle for that particular licensee is sufficient. They can always go back and learn more. So, and I'm not sure, Dr. Paris, this is where to bring it up, the issue of, because it might be in the other question, the issue that we have with the petitioners completing all their hours in, 3 months or 4 months. So I do have a comment on that, but I'm not sure if we're going to discuss that a little bit later.
I think it's appropriate here.
Okay. I think that's not reasonable to have them catch up all their hours within 4 months. The human brain really doesn't process all that information in that short amount of time. The idea behind the education classes is so that we learn something and that you apply it to your practice and that you can remember it, and it's for the public safety. So if I don't know if there's a way to have the petitioners be completing these hours as they go along. To me, if you want your license back, that you would be participating. What we look for is participation in the field in some way. And so if you're not even doing online courses or any education within your field, even though your license has been revoked, trying to catch up after 3 years or 5 years within a given time frame, to me, does not scream like public safety and the welfare of the public. So that's my concern with Dr. Adams' point as far as repeating the same class. If it's a different instructor, that would be one thing. But if it's the same instructor with the same class code on there, if you want to learn something again, watch the on-demand or that sort of thing. But to get credit, I don't agree with that. So my concern is that there's just so many hours packed into a very short amount of time. And what we're looking for is, has the person kept up with the field, whether it's insurance and documentation, technique, et cetera. And so completing those hours in such a short amount of time when there's hundreds of hours concerns me.
I share your concerns there. I think we've seen a lot of that at the full board meetings lately with petitioners. I'm just trying to, kind of also consider that we have some petitioners that maybe are just have not considered petitioning to get their license back, and they can't really go back in time. And so I think once the process is in place, they're they're kind of back on notice, and so I'm not sure how necessarily we might address that. Regarding the annual repetition of a course, my concern would be, I would be more supportive that they are not repeating the same course, within a single renewal cycle. I feel like part of the assurances for public safety is that there is some breadth of, knowledge and subject matter that licensees take. And I think that kind of aligns with the reason why we do, mandated CE, is to kind of have assurances that way. And I think it's a slippery slope in that if they take an 8-hour course and then repeat that course, I would consider that like a refresher that you would kind of naturally do with any new learning material, and especially in the same cycle, and not necessarily, as new learning material. And so I think the responsibility to, refresh yourself with new knowledge is something where you've already received credit for learning. I think that is the burden of the licensee. And so I think that's a slippery slope for us to see them potentially have, like, say, an 8-hour course that they repeat and then do their mandated CE. And that's the extent of it. So, so those are my thoughts there. I think in regards to the petitioners, especially the petitioners that have come back, many years have gone by. I think maybe there might be a consideration that where they have multiple cycles, 8, 10 years, things like the longer term, 5 years, things like that. That maybe we have some flexibility to get our assurances through other areas like spec and MBCE Part 4 and CCLE, et cetera, and that maybe we think about, that CE repetition, even if we were to approve of that and allow it, that even it has a limited amount of assurances, I think, for, in the interest of public safety, at least in my mind, and that maybe we limit that, the amount of, annual CE that's needed beyond a certain number of years. So like once you've done 3 years worth of CE, or 4 years, whatever it happens to be, that's almost 100 hours of CE. And I think if we need assurances beyond that, we can look to other ways to ensure public safety. So those are kind of my thoughts on this.
So I didn't get clear. Are you in favor? Are you saying that they would not repeat a course more than once in a renewal cycle, or up to 2?
In a single renewal cycle, I don't think licensees should be repeating courses.
So 0 repeat. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, within a single, because that in effect, it puts us in a really strange position of having to potentially see licensees do, like I'm an October renewal, so I do a course in August, I do a course in September, I do the same course in, October, and then potentially I do the same course in November. So I think like in the second cycle, if you were to at least get into the second cycle, then I don't necessarily have issue with somebody, only the licensees know their knowledge, skills, and abilities that they've, I concur with you there that, it's on them to kind of figure out if maybe I need to relearn this material. I'm just not sure that we should be offering credit for that within the same, renewal cycle.
And as for the, I like your idea relative to, like, setting a time limit. Like, if someone has had their license revoked and they're beyond, say, 5 years, I think it makes sense. I mean, we can have, you have them take all the continuing education, but, I think it makes more sense to just have them repass national Part 4s, because then they're going to have to, study a lot of that stuff, that same stuff anyway.
Yeah,
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, and I think if we were to disallow repeat courses for the multiple cycles, but we had a limit on the number of cycles. I mean, it's hard to ask somebody to go out and get 8 years of continuing education or 5 years of continuing ed and not, just don't repeat anything. I mean, I don't know if that's, completely reasonable either. I think it's doable.
Yeah, I think with the courses out there, though, Dave, wouldn't you admit with PACE and multiple providers, it seems like there's a lot out there that they can pursue. Particularly once Zoom gets approved, that's going to make it easier for them to access classes around the country that may be approved to, California wise.
Yeah, I know. I think it's doable. I just, I think we would be best served, in the interest of public protection to, maybe have a reasonable number of years where, we feel like, you're kind of caught up on CE. And then if we feel like we need other assurances, we have other ways to help provide those.
So would it be reasonable that we, for that group, say 3 years of CE, and then beyond that, we have the other assurances, if it's been revoked for 5 years or whatever, we have, Part 4, et cetera. So do you have a number of years in mind for that?
I think probably, 4 years as a maximum. I think 3 years is even probably, reasonable, but I think 4 years as kind of a limit on, the amount of CE that needs to be provided.
How about for the beyond five? I mean, if a person's beyond 5 years, that seems like a reasonable timeline for having to take like the national board exam.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, I don't know if that item, I would defer to Ms. Walker. I don't know if that item is something we need to discuss today, like the other opportunities we have to, on a petitioner. But I think just for the CE aspect of this and having multiple cycles, I think having a limit on the number of cycles that we would require them to get caught up on continuing education, and then answering the question as to whether or not, we think they should be able to repeat. My thought is no on the limited number of cycles, and then also I don't think that they should be repeating, within a single renewal cycle. Ms. Walker.
Dr. Parrish, just to respond to your question and also the committee's discussion, just keep in mind today's agenda topic is on the repeating of the CE courses. As far as the criteria for eligibility for filing a petition for reinstatement, that workload is with the enforcement committee and will likely go to the December meeting. So I just want to just keep us in the bounds of on the repetition of CE courses. So with that portion of it in mind, let's just discuss whether or not it's acceptable to repeat them. And then I also just wanted to point out one of the staff concerns on the courses, it relates to the actual certificate themselves. It's very difficult from some of the providers to differentiate between whether, especially if someone repeats a course on the same day, it's pretty much impossible without contacting the provider directly to know whether or not they truly took the course 2 times or if they just took the same certificate and made a photocopy and submitted it twice. So that's when we start talking about parameters on what's acceptable for repetition. It may be appropriate to include some kind of time frame on which that repetition occurs so that they can't do it on the same day. Maybe there's a 1 week waiting period, a 1 month, something to that effect, just to kind of separate out that learning, because that's just something additional we kind of wanted to add for the committee on this issue.
And if we were to say no to the repetition, that would solve that problem, correct? Ms. Walker?
That's correct. This is Sabina, if I might chime in here. A lot of other healthcare boards, and not to say you have to do what other people do. I know a lot of other healthcare boards do not allow for the repetition of a course in the each renewal cycle. But again, that's just my experience with my other boards. That doesn't mean that you have to do that. It's just, if you do choose to do that, just know that you are definitely not alone.
Thank you.
Dr. Parrish, could I just get clarification on your statement? I think what I heard you say was you're in agreement of not redoing a class within a single renewal cycle. However, after that renewal cycle, they can take the same class again and again, as long as it's not in the same renewal cycle. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Ms. Walker, I have difficulty with those petitioner packets, identifying if the class was taken twice, if it was photocopied. I think it's very confusing, and I think it's wasting people's money to have us try and sort through that. So having clarification, which I don't think is difficult for the provider on their certificate, that clearly says what the class is, who the instructor was, the date, because it is very confusing. And I don't want to make a judgment of, oh, they just repeated the class when it was, in fact, a different class. So I'm in favor of clarification from the provider on their certificate. I don't think that would be difficult to do, but
yes,
my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. We're including that in future reviews.
Well, I think just to come full circle, I'm getting feedback from somebody.
Agreed. It may be a issue with someone having their microphone and speakers on at the same time.
Should we just all go to mute? I'll go to mute. Start over.
That might help.
How about now? No, we're still getting it. Somebody's got their microphone on.
Okay, I don't see any microphones on other than my own. Dr. Adams, go ahead and unmute and try and see if that got better. Okay.
So just for clarification, what prompted this discussion was petitioners, not that we were seeing a pattern in our licensees. We see this as the petitioners. So I think if Kristen, we're going to be dealing with the petitioners repetitive in another area, then because I think that's what prompted all of this in the first place was the courses being repeated over and over. I don't know that we're having that problem with our licensees. I guess it's possible. And to Dr. Parrish's point, it seems like something productive to take out of this is if it's our feeling that repeating the course, only being able to take a course once in a cycle, if that's what we want to do, I think that's probably what we need to make the motion on relative to this, because that will take care of the problem on both counts.
And I think just furthering this and trying to, I think we've kind of meandered through most of the questions except for number 3, which is how would the restrictions imposed on the repeating of CE courses be enforced? Should the responsibility of ensuring the licensee's compliance be placed on the board-approved CE provider, the licensee, or both? Any discussion on that question?
Well, I think that would be handled if the licensee is audited, because if the licensee is audited, so somebody just did their. So I think that issue of what you're talking about, number 3, would be handled via an audit, because if a person as we're getting better on Connect, they're going to be uploading their certificates. The enforcement can just check those certificates very quickly to see if they're the same or if they're not in a same renewal cycle. And providers are having multiple people take their courses. They're not always going to be aware if somebody's coming back a day later, if they're doing an online course or a live course. Maybe some of them can do that. I don't know. Maybe public comment can shed some light on that. But I think if we establish that you can't repeat the same course with more than the once for credit, you can do it as many times as you want, but you're only going to get credit for one time. And that kind of takes care of itself. And if they get audited and they're not complying with that, then they'll be fined. That's my understanding, right?
Yeah, I think it should be on the licensees, and the providers have, their own things to do. And, I do a class and I get the certificate and I put it in a file. So if I'm audited, I have the file and, I pull it out. So I think that is the responsibility of the licensee to keep track of their certificates.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if we do notification to the licensees and awareness that you cannot repeat those.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. I muted while it was overhead going on here. I think I think if we do notification and maybe there's an attestation added to the submission so that they can acknowledge that they're aware that they're not allowed to repeat courses in the same renewal cycle, and then the audit process would be our way to impose the restrictions if needed. Any other discussion on that, on number 3?
No, not.
And I think the one area, I think the area where we haven't maybe clarified might be required is number 4 is, you know, are we, my impression would be, and my thought would be that a petitioner applying, I think, you know, those are the times when we're really looking for assurances that there's a breadth of education and knowledge and that they're getting kind of caught up, you know, if they haven't practiced for some time. And so I would think the same, you know, that we wouldn't allow repetition there in, you know, going forward. I think that's probably the and as Dr. Adams mentioned, that's the problematic issue that we're trying to solve here. So I would be in favor of not allowing, you know, repeat courses during that, the makeup, you know, CE.
Ms. Walker, is number 4 more for the enforcement committee?
It actually not sure why there's so much feedback, but that issue kind of splits between enforcement and the licensing committee. So because within that question, it's addressing the petition process itself, which is being addressed by the enforcement committee, but then the qualifications for just renewing a license that's in forfeiture or canceled status, where they have to upfront provide all of their CE as part of the application process, that fits with the licensing committee. But I think as far as the committee's discussion today, staff has a pretty good idea of your intent there is the once per renewal cycle for licensees, and then kind of applying that same criteria when we're looking at petitions or maybe a canceled license, where the intention is, you know, per review that we're doing of that grouping of courses, it should only appear one time. So we can work with council on kind of language, and if it needs to go back to licensing and enforcement committee for those processes, we'll work through that as well.
Thank you.
Capture, yeah, that sounds good to me. Any other discussion from the committee? Okay, hearing no further discussion from the committee, moderator, can we open this agenda item for public comment, please?
Certainly. And we do have, if you would like to make a public comment on this agenda item, you can look for the question mark inside the box at the lower right corner of your computer screen, or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. Or the other option is you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. We do have one request for comment from someone logged in as Marcus Strutz. And Ms. Marcus, I will be sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll have 3 minutes. You're unmuted.
Thank you. So yes, I agree very much with what you guys said for sure. David, my experience doing the CE for 20 years has been the doctors who are taking it twice are just trying to slide by and kind of get away with it. And then they take it next year, or they do the scenario that you depicted, which was I took it in November, and then my birthday, I took it the very next month. I see that, but not very often. It would be next to impossible for us to navigate through who repeated those courses or not. And I think Pamela was right on with that should be the licensee's responsibility to track their own CE. And then once they get audited, and it sounded to me like Kristen was talking about a audit system that everyone gets audited, then that would be great. With the people who are trying to re-up their license, I like the idea of 4 years and you can't repeat anything. I mean, the whole point is to get them back up and running. And that idea of passing the national board, I think, would force them to have to take a multiple style of CE classes and other classes. So I think that's a really good idea. That's it. Thanks.
And we do have, we do have another raised hand.
Just a thank you. That's all.
Thank you. All right. So our next raised hand is from Dr. Vi, and I will be sending you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes. And you're unmuted.
Good afternoon, doctors. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had a question regarding, so if I take a CE course and there is a way that we actually do a prepayment. So, for example, I'll pay for 12 hours in advance, and I know according to the schedule that one doctor, for example, if I'm taking ethics or examination history, or an attorney is going to be presenting that day, and I particularly like to hear from that attorney. Does that mean that if I taken that course and then the next time I want to take that course again, and it's considered a repeat, will that take me to, I guess, not being qualified for my hours of, continuing education? Only because I enjoy listening to certain speakers. And also, if I already enrolled in their course, but say someone else is in their place, or it gets canceled for whatever reason, and then it's sort of like a delay for me to finish my courses. And I try to do it once a month, so that way I'm pacing myself and I'm not rushed to finish my 24 hours by the end of the year. So my concern is just basically financial burden. If you were to put this um, on the board, to saying that the requirement is that we cannot repeat these courses, only because it's not any of our faults that if events happen where their flight gets delayed, they can't make it, or for whatever reason they cancel. So I have to take the same course for, if I don't want to, but I need it because I got to finish it and have it done by the end of the year. So I just wanted to ask, is that going to really sort of just be like only for the participants that are asking for this question so that they are audited? Or are we going to be all looked at and will be denied just because, it was out of our control that we had to take a course again, so that way we can fill our 24 hours
30 seconds.
and not be denied? So that was my concern.
Thank you.
And we have one more request for comment from someone logged into WebEx as Cliff Tao. Cliff, I will be sending you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And you're unmuted.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, you can hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I understand where the the spirit of not duplicating CE hours comes from, but I think you may want to consider. I mean, I hate to complicate things, but making live hours okay to duplicate. Doing two or more in the same cycle. And I have a couple reasons for that. I think it's always different, however many times you do a live one. But if you're talking about on-demand ones, asynchronous type of learning, those are literally exactly the same thing. Even though I think you could learn more by doing a course twice, even though it is exactly the same thing. Another thing to consider is that some live courses, especially the ones that I do, they're only an hour, and our approval says that we're just discussing, this is summarizing just various cases. But when we offer it multiple times a year, they are all different cases. So under the same approval code, they are vastly different amount, or not amount, but vastly different information, but under the same approval code. Something else that I think maybe you should could be considered is having different process or different limits for a petitioner versus a non-petitioner. And then lastly, I know this doesn't equate exactly the same, but I think we all have favorite movies that we've watched more than one time, and I think every time we watch it, we learn something new. Some of us may have watched our favorite movies more than twice, or many more than 2 times. So, just something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tao.
And we have one more comment from Marcus Strutz. And Mr. Strutz, I will be sending you the request to unmute your microphone.
Okay, thank you.
You're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a couple other things. So the approval codes are supposed to be on the certificate. So if providers aren't doing that, they just need to be informed that that should be required. So that would resolve that one issue. And then for the repetitiveness, we provide all of the notes that they took, then they are available on our website. So they can go back. I think Dr. Daniels said that as well. But the notes are available and they can go back and reread them 100 times if they want to. And then Dr. Tao, how's it going? Yeah, I thought that was a good point too, though. So some of the courses are much different every time we teach them, and some of them are identical, whether they're live or however they're taught. So there is a little issue there for sure. So, okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see one more raised hand from Shasta Carey. I'm going to be sending you a request to unmute your microphone. You're unmuted.
Hi, guys. So I was just gonna piggyback off of Dr. Chow and state that I personally think that there should be a limit of at least 2 times within a renewal year for live presentations. One reason being that not all live presentations are submitted for distance learning, which doesn't always allow, a DC to retake that course and learn more from it. So and a lot of times it is beneficial to be able to take it more than once. 2 times I think makes sense, but we have a lot of district meetings as well, and those are all in person. And I think that, just saying and it could be the same course, same speakers, same presentation going to different districts. And, I think doctors putting out that time to go to the in-person meetings and support their districts, putting in those hours, to me would make sense to allow them to get credit, even if it's the same presenter, at least for that 2 times for the live hours. And that's it for me.
Thank you.
And I do not see any other requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Please, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to just open it up to any further discussion from the committee members.
I would say I'm inclined from my original, position that I think taking a course up to twice. I know there's going to be some people that are going to, not have the right attitude, but I think I guess I try to appeal to the idea that our better angels are gonna prevail, and that people will, if they do repeat a course, they're doing it for the right reasons, as opposed to assuming that everyone's going to do it for the wrong reasons. So I'm inclined to feel like I had originally said, that not repeating something more than twice, only 2 times in a cycle, seems reasonable. But I see the case for both, and I think both. If it's the feeling of the committee that, and I think that would handle both issues, both from the petitioner side and from the licensee side, that no more than twice in a renewal cycle. But I'm amenable to both to both positions as well. So those are my final comments.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Dr. Daniels, any further discussion?
Not really. I mean, I think one time in a cycle is kind of where I stand. I mean, I have hundreds of hours a year that are all different. I don't think 24 hours of different classes is unreasonable. And I definitely am empathetic to if someone doesn't show up, what class, but the whole idea is to take from different people, take different instructors. I took something online that I wasn't going to, it wasn't in my, kind of not my jam, but I took it. It was like, oh, I should, do something different, check it out. So, if the other committee members felt like twice in a year, to move it forward, I can get behind that. I really think once is plenty. You can take it as many times after that. You can take it the same next year. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And especially with, Zoom, someone, that's a whole benefit. I mean, to me, one of the benefits of doing Zoom and live interaction now, as a result of COVID, is that opens up that availability that there's so many more options now. I would be on board if it was, we had to do all of them in person. I could get behind that, but with the access of Zoom and having that part of being able to do those hours that way, I feel that it's reasonable, but you definitely hear the comments of the public.
Thank you. I would just have two comments. I still believe that it's not in the best interest of the public to have us allowing licensees to repeat the same course content. And that's not to say that they can't. That's to say that they can. It's just a matter of us, having our assurances and giving them CE credit for it. I'm inclined to support or what our initial discussion was, is that there would not be repetition in the same cycle, and with the petitioners, no repetition in the however many cycles, and the number of cycles obviously is something that will go, it sounds like, to the enforcement committee. So at this point, I think I'd like to make a motion to have staff develop language around disallowing repeat courses in single renewal cycles or multiple cycles for petitioners. And maybe that's two motions. Single cycles for licensees, or multiple cycles for petitioners, and developing language around ensuring the licensee's compliance via attestation and through our audit process. Ms. Knight, is that motion sound like it covers it?
I was trying to take some quick notes to make sure I did also understand that. So you would like for the board staff to develop language that does not allow for the repetition of a course in the single renewal period. Is that correct? I got that part right?
Yes.
Awesome. And then did you want to separate them out? I know that was part of your question.
Yeah, and I think secondly, in regards to petitioners, not allowing repeat courses in multiple cycles.
Okay. And Ms.
Well,
Walker,
we
did
can
you
handle
want
that.
to? Okay.
Or we can handle that in the enforcement committee meeting this afternoon.
Right. Maybe that discussion might be more relevant for enforcement, or you can make a recommendation to the enforcement committee, what the CE committee might recommend to them. So we could have a motion about just the repeated, no repeated CE courses for all licensees in one renewal cycle. And then we could also have a motion recommending to the enforcement committee to consider limiting that repetition of courses for petitioners.
I would just have a question in regards to this pertains to section 365. Is that correct? These motions would pertain to section 365. And is that section best handled in this committee, or?
I'm trying to get there quickly. I closed my book.
Ms. Walker, what are your thoughts here?
I was quickly navigating there myself. No, so this motion, since it's setting for the language around the single cycle for the licensee, I think it most appropriately would fit under 361, which outlines the CE requirements. Probably just put some language in there that clearly articulates that they'll only be granted credit for a single time of completing a board-approved course during the renewal period. As far as then forwarding it out for other committees, I think 365 is the portion that's going to land with the enforcement committee to discuss how they limit that. And also 371 is where it addresses the restoration of a canceled license. That's the portion that would, if we incorporated something to that effect in there, that would go to licensing committee.
Okay, so is it easier if I amend my motion, motion to have staff develop language around only not allowing, disallowing repeat continuing education during a single cycle?
Yes, that is, this is Sabina again. Would that, in that motion, would you be recommending it go to the full board, or Ms. Walker? I'm not sure the timing of this, if we're planning on bringing it back to the committee first, or should this be a recommendation to the full board?
Depends on the committee's sense of urgency on this. If it's something that can wait, we're still developing all the language on 361 for the updated continuing education requirements for licensees. That's going to be discussed during the next agenda item. So if the committee's sense is developing the restriction on not repeating within the same cycle, we can incorporate that as in the updates that we bring back to the committee on 361. If it's something that's urgent, it could be a recommendation goes to the full board. My advice would be to just, use it as a direction to staff, and we'll incorporate it in updated language on 361.
I concur.
I would amend my motion to reflect that it's.
Perfect. So we have a motion to direct staff to develop language that reflects the discussion and the desire for licensees to not get credit for repeated courses in one renewal cycle. Does that sound correct?
That sounds correct for me.
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion from the committee members?
Not for me.
Dr. Adams, would you please call for the vote?
Dr. Paris?
Yes.
Dr. Adams? Yes. Yes. Dr. Daniels? Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Motion carries.
And I would just ask one further question. Does board staff feel like we need any other motions on this agenda item? Did we miss a request?
No, this agenda item is complete. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving to agenda item number 5. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding proposed changes to annual CE requirements for licensees, including revised subject areas. And I would turn it over to Ms. Walker to provide the staff report.
Thank you. So as part of the comprehensive updates to the continuing education program, the committee has been developing revisions to the annual CE requirements for licensees to align mandatory subject areas with core competencies necessary for patient safety. Rather than focusing on some prior draft text that we had itself, for purposes of today's meeting, what we've compiled and briefly summarized are the proposed CE requirements that have been discussed by the committee to date. So I'm going to briefly just summarize those. They're within the meeting packet. At this point, the total number of hours of continuing education remains at 24 hours, with 10 hours of mandatory credit through courses in 4 competency areas. Competency Area 1, Evaluation and Management, 4 hours. Competency Area 2, Documentation, Record Keeping and Coding, 2 hours. Competency 3, Adjustment, Technique, or Manipulation, 2 hours, with the caveat that courses in this competency area must be completed through the in-person learning experience rather than through the distance learning or the live like Zoom type courses. And then also competency area 4, which would cover ethics, law, and jurisprudence with 2 hours. From there, the remaining 14 hours of CE credit may be earned through a combination of activities, including completing board-approved CE courses in what we're branding as Competency 5, summarized as electives. So this is a very broad catch-all category intended to encapsulate all of the other CE subject areas that we currently have in the regulation, and rather than grouping them by each individual area, just grouping them into one broad Competency 5 of electives. Other options include completing CE courses that have been approved by the Division of Workers' Compensation or any other healing arts board or bureau within the department, with the notation that if licensees are taking these courses that are approved by other agencies, it therefore becomes that licensee's responsibility to retain proof that those courses have been approved by those entities and provide that documentation to the board upon request. We previously had issues with when we're conducting audits, licensees not maintaining that level of evidence, and then it results in board staff spending quite a bit of time trying to navigate into the different requirements of the different boards to figure out whether or not a course has been approved. So that was added to that portion. Other methods for obtaining CE credit haven't changed. Attending a board meeting, you can get 4 hours of CE credit. Exam development, you can get up to 16 hours of credit. And also participating as an NBCE examiner, you can get 6 hours of credit. In addition, there hasn't been a change on the total cap on distance learning. It still remains 12 hours of CE credit. However, in this context, the CE learning definition has been narrowly defined to include online courses where there's no participatory interaction between the licensee and the instructor during the instructional period. There's also a limit of no more than 12 hours of CE credit being earned per day. So as far as today's discussion, we're requesting that the committee continue this discussion, identify if any further changes may be necessary, and provide feedback to staff.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. I would open this agenda item up for questions and discussion by the committee.
Dr. Paris, I had a couple questions since I'm new to the committee. I was wondering what the definition of evaluation and management is. Evaluation and management of what?
Yeah. So I think that probably could be delineated better. I'm getting an echo. Is anyone else?
This is the moderator, and I have muted Dr. Daniels because I believe her speakers are stronger than her microphone can handle.
Thank you. Yeah, and so I think we could probably have the language define that a little bit better. That really is in regards to evaluation and management, meaning like all aspects of history, physical exam, informed consent, medical decision making, and reflects what we do in initial evaluation and also follow-up evaluation or re-evals or re-exams. And the reason I think initially why we looked at that E&M language is it aligned with like CMS language, which also includes some really well-defined aspects of evaluation and management components. And that also aligns us, I think, when we look at enforcement issues, not for this call necessarily, but I think that helps us better define when we can look at what a licensee coded and what should have been done in that coding, and so sometimes you're coding, not so much now because there's, you can use some of these codes have gone to time-based more recently with the CPT code change and eliminating the 99201, et cetera. But I think it gives us a much better idea of the expected documentation and it also kind of brings us more into what I think is the standard of, the type of coding that goes along with those codes. So we chose E&M just to kind of align with that, and instead of having our own language, I guess, necessarily. That was the thought.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the way it's currently written is very vague, and I'm concerned that providers will have a difficult time in ensuring what is qualified in that and potential work for staff as far as approving these CE hours that fall into that category. My next question was, I just wanted to make sure I understand, is it the intent that competency 3, the 2 hours of manipulation, adjustment, and technique is in person, so that a licensee would be required to go someplace for solely 2 hours and for the technique portion, is that correct?
Well, we wouldn't require that of them necessarily, except that it would have to be an in-person learning experience, which is our face-to-face. So, but yes, the answer is yes, but at the same time, I don't want to imply that would always require a completely separate, trip or drive. I think, a lot of the in-person continuing education events that currently go on, have in say a weekend full of CE, they might be able to get in those 2 hours. Does that answer your question?
Correct, but it might for some.
Right. No. Yeah. Surely.
Which is an access issue.
Potentially, yes.
My comment is I think I've made this abundantly clear in past CE committee meetings that I feel that there is great benefit. Obviously, the Zoom aspect of technique I have found to be equal or better in many cases than to what I've experienced in the past being in person for technique, because of the ability for camera angles and for everybody to have a front row seat on technique. So if there's anything on this that I would want to amend, it would be that a person can have the option to get their 2 hours of technique credit via Zoom or in person, have that option. And everything else I think looks good. I had one question for Kristen, is that do we need to be a little bit more explicit in the elective section of giving some examples? We had talked about, in the past, the possibility of, delineate out some things, not, how's that language go? Including the following, but not excluding, I don't know, however that language goes, that, things that we give suggestions, but that's not an exhaustive list, that there's other things that could be approved that are inconsistently with rules, regulations, and the Chiropractic Act. But giving a list of things like nutrition, philosophy, rehab, research, literature research, review, and such like.
Sure. And just to clarify, so for purposes of the document that's in the meeting materials, that is not proposed language for the regulations in any means. It's simply just a kind of bulleted summary at a very high level of this is kind of the framework that's been discussed, so that if the committee's comfortable with that framework or with or without some minor changes, at that point, staff will take it back, work with legal counsel to actually formally draft that document. It's just at the committee level, we've been trying to kind of get through the material, and in many cases, some of the prior meetings were focused solely on text, but we need to kind of take a step back and just get the big picture of what the goal is, and that way staff will put that together for you.
I completely concur, and I really like the way it's laid out. Again, I would just add my feeling that I think the language for the for competency 3 technique, I think the video conferencing should be an acceptable option. And to Dr. Daniels' point, access, as well as I think it is consistent with other healing arts boards, and I think it's also in my personal experience been shown to be very effective and informative and helpful. So that's my 2 minutes.
Dr. Paris, can I ask a question?
Yes,
and reviewing the meeting notes, you had made a comment that you felt that the live interactive Zoom was below standard regards with technique. And I was wondering if you could define how it, in your mind, is below the standard. And then I did have, if the committee will allow, I do have a few notes on this topic.
I'm trying to refresh my memory on the context of that specific comment. I think if I have to reflect back, was that from the meeting minutes from this committee last time?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that reflects precisely what I said, but the context of that was meant to be taken in that I think that there are certain things that are best done if possible, where there's an opportunity to actually have, you know, bodies positioned in front of you, and even though you may not be doing a grade 5, you may be able to get familiar with the setup and the weight of a head and experience how different joints and segments of the spine are, or areas of the spine are moving or not moving depending on who's in front of you. And I think having actual setup in front of you is and as much as you can, performing the functions of those particular line of drives, et cetera. I think that's a crucial component. The example that I might use in that, and I just as something off the top of my head, is that even as CPR moved to mainly online didactic, they still utilize very realistic, actually, these mannequins that provide feedback. So you still can't just sit there and watch somebody do it, and you still actually have to go and certify that you put your hands on. At least that's the way we do it here. But that you still go and there's actually something in front of you that you actually have to perform, and you're not actually doing CPR, much like we're not actually treating a patient, but that you're demonstrating at least some baseline knowledge up to that point where the thrust would occur, and that there's an opportunity to do that. And I know there's advantages to online and being up close, and and there's some areas where we have stages that you're not going to get on, et cetera. But I think to have the opportunity to do that is what I was thinking about at that time.
Okay. Yeah, it was on page 7, and you had mentioned you had witnessed some technique in other patient courses through Zoom, that you did not believe this type of instruction met the standards of quality education for public protection. So that was the, so I had a few notes that that I was hoping to go through, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay. So one of my concerns with only allowing in-person adjustment or technique is kind of the first thing for me is that informed consent in these situations is generally not obtained. When it is, most people do not read the consent. This is similar to what I find in practice. We ask patients to read and sign a consent form, but it's rare that the person actually reads it and asks questions. I know as a practitioner, as I'm giving my informed consent, there's times that I have to hound the patient to actually read it, and then that they understand it and ask questions. And when I go to live technique classes, they're generally, I think maybe one had informed consent. Many people feel that they trust the situation or they trust the doctor, the form really won't stand up, blah, 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 blah. And so I feel like with having in person, when you're actually touching somebody and we're not getting informed consent, I feel like it inadvertently entrenches to our licensees consciousness that it is, that there are certain situations that you don't need informed consent, say whether it's your partner or it's your friend or something like that. So I feel like in the interest of public safety, consistency as far as making these requirements is important. And so I don't know if we're going to say you have to do it in person. Are we going to micromanage each class and require an informed consent? Do we not feel that an informed consent before somebody puts their hands on somebody, whether they're following through with an adjustment or not? There's soft tissue techniques that may be inappropriate. People may have clotting factors, etc. Also, we get cases that routinely come before us that people fail to do an examination before rendering treatment. And I feel like in live technique classes, frequently nobody takes a history, nobody asks the question, and licensees have injuries themselves. And so, I feel again, you're encouraging the lack of full examination. And yes, if we're just setting up and not following through, but I think we've all been in classes where more happens than that. And I also feel that we're giving mixed messages if we're doing these things in class, yet we are not following through what we would expect in the office. The other comment I have is logistically, it being in classes myself, there's frequently not enough tables to practice on. People take the breakout session to set up on people. They take it as time to go check their text messages, go to the bathroom. I've struggled myself with finding a partner at times, other people finding a partner. It's difficult to see a lot of times that the people who are most aggressive are the ones in the front, and you have people who maybe have a personality that aren't as robust, and so they kind of sit in the back and they miss the education anyways. They are too shy to ask for someone to set up on, and the other is just logistically. I mean, the chiropractic profession is so currently male dominated. It's just the way it is. And if a person, typically a she, her, has the ability to conceive a child, and this occurs during the time of that conception, physically they may not be able to go to the class. Physically, they may not be able to have the strength to perform something or to even set up. The access of finding childcare for 2 hours online is very different than 2 hours going someplace else. So I'm a little concerned with, I think it should be an option, but I'm a little concerned with restricting access to maybe people who are unable to get there, and that's related to being a minority in the field. And again, I hear what you're saying as far as, it is different when you put your hands on somebody. However, we're not teaching people to adjust. Our licensees should know how to adjust. That should have been taught in school. This is for, keeping your skills up, learning something new. And the truth of it is, in the literature, people who want to learn and it's online or in class, they're going to do it. We can't make somebody who doesn't want to learn, even if it's in person, they're still not going to learn. They're going to be on their phone. They're going to do whatever they're doing. So I feel it's in the licensee's motivation. I took a class online. It was a technique, and I didn't have anyone to practice with. I took a couple pictures, was able to review it, and went and felt very successful at completing it because I already have an education in how to adjust. I would never suggest teaching new licensees online. And it takes repetition, putting my hands on somebody. Oh, okay, does that feel right? Well, I still need to go practice it. So I'm not sure if there's much gain there unless you're a person that learns that way. And many people do not learn well in person. They are shy or for whatever reason. And we've seen through Zoom that many people learn much better and they do better online because they're more comfortable. They ask more questions. They are not as intimidated. And so I feel like not having the option, we're limiting, again, access to people that may not have that personality type that are going to go out and learn those skills. So, doing a literature review, it's unfortunate that our field, we had an opportunity during this time to really do a study and say, does the doctor of chiropractic, do their skills, are they less than they were from pre-COVID through COVID to now? Meaning, did the absence of hands-on training change our skill set? And unfortunately, we don't have a study that I know that answers that question. So we don't know. It's an opinion. It's a feeling, it's an opinion, and they're very valid. But other professions have done studies on this. Online learning work better than offline learning, a paper by Medical Education Online 2019. They did a very good study. They compared offline learning with online learning, and it said there's no evidence that offline learning works better, meaning in person. Another paper showed that a remote teaching of knot tying for simple suturing for medical students was effectively taught remotely. And there's study after study after study. I just kind of picked two of showing if it's done appropriately and it's done with requirements, you have to have your camera on, etc. Other professions and other educational institutions have studies that demonstrate that it's a viable source. And so my concern is that we just don't have that study. We don't have the information that I'm aware of that shows that the lack of in-person across the board has been a problem for our skill set. And again, another study, accurately said, if a person is motivated to learn and it is through an online venue, they will learn it. So again, it's trusting our licensees and their motivation. And, I have a colleague, she's never adjusted a person in her life. She's a chiropractor. So, there's other things that other people do that are within the license that are not just doing a setup on somebody. So those are some of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there any further discussion? Dr. Adams from the committee?
I think Dr. Daniels laid it out pretty good, and I concur with a lot of her comments about the benefits of the access to live video conferencing as a medium of education.
If prior to any motion, and if we'll come back to see if there's any further discussion, but let me me ask the moderator to open up agenda number 5 for public comment.
Certainly, we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If you would like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon in the lower right of your WebEx screen, type the word comment in the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. We do have a request for comment from Marcus Strutz. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I thought Dr. Daniels nailed it. A couple other things to add to that. You can take 2 hours remotely via Zoom, but there's nothing stopping you from taking more hours doing hands-on. So that's the bare minimum requirement. That should be optional of doing it in person or not. And then people who want more can just take more if they want. They could take 24 hours of that other than the other requirements. The other issue that I did not hear come up is people traveling for just 2 hours. I did, as I think all three of you know, extensive surveys while we were doing Zoom, and an unbelievable percentage, like 95% of all the people wanted to do everything on Zoom. And when I first started doing Zoom, I heard about it before COVID, or when COVID started, I was adamantly against it. I said, it'll never work. And I had that same, like, oh, it'll never work. And then I started doing it and figuring out the camera angles and stuff, and have a camera 3 inches away from my hand that I can show them to turn their hand this way versus that way. It was phenomenal. I had never seen anything like it. And most people said, I've watched you for 20 years and I learned more through Zoom than I ever did in person. And that was a huge amount of people who said that very thing, which was pretty cool. The traveling, you've got people who come over from Japan, you got people who come over from Italy, South America, from all over the world who maintain their chiropractic license. They would have to travel for 2 hours, which doesn't make very much sense, right? So yeah, it's been amazing. We have those videos on our website and they can watch them over and over and over again. The other thing we could do is require that, yeah, you can do it on Zoom, but you have to have a partner with you and you have to have a table. And then you could do those setups. And we could say, okay, let's set up on C2 on the right. Let's do this. And then you switch and go back and forth. And then it would be a manual learning experience, but it'd be one-on-one in an office where maybe there's 4 docs in an office or 10 docs in an office, and they gather together. And the instruction's over Zoom, but they then can interact. So there's it doesn't have to be just one or the other. You could actually get both, and then kind of answering Dr. Daniels' point of, some people are uncomfortable. Well, if it's just you and me, then maybe we're not so uncomfortable. Maybe we actually get more learning out of it because I'm not in that forum where there's 30 people and I'm a little uncomfortable with my skill set and stuff, and we actually get better learning. So I was a huge convert from absolutely will never work to it's the best thing I've ever seen. Technically. In 59 years. So good stuff.
30 seconds.
No, I will stop now. So yeah, I'm all for it, making everything available on Zoom, and then they can take more technique live if they want, and then they can practice, and then they should. And we set up those programs anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next raised hand is from someone logged in as Dr. V. I have sent you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes. You're unmuted.
Yes, I just wanted to say Dr. Daniels described it perfectly. I agree with what she's saying. I really enjoyed the in-class technique, but also I really enjoyed the Zoom because, like Dr. Marcus said, there's different angles you can see. And then also, if you can't find a partner, or the more aggressive students or doctors that are in front and you can't see because they're bigger, taller, or whatever. And sometimes you might not want to be the person that they want to demonstrate on. And sometimes I'm always the one that's being asked. And I would like to just stand there and observe. So I think with Zoom, it gives everybody the opportunity to actually, like Dr. Daniel said, to ask questions, and those that are more shy and not really wanting to participate or to actually set up on, I think it's a great tool. So I do hope that we continue in class or Zoom and not make it a regulation where we have to only do it in class. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
And then we have a request for comment from someone logged in as GK. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes. You're unmuted.
I assume you can hear me. Okay, my name is GK. I
Yes.
call myself Ganesh. I'm not a chiropractor, but I'm somebody who uses a chiropractic profession very much as a spinal cord injury patient. I see a lot of comments coming from doctors who are okay with using online as a training tool for continuing education, but as a consumer, I would actually prefer my chiropractor to have an hands-on experience. And coming from a background in fitness and exercise, of course, I can go and get a NSAM certification and all that, whatever categorization is available. I'm actually certified in fitness from Australia, but let's say I want to increase my knowledge in the techniques of powerlifting, let's say a deadlift. I wouldn't be comfortable learning that online, or neither would anyone, because there's a lot of techniques, nuances that somebody needs to teach me right in person. So likewise, I think it's the same with chiropractor. Right? You can learn the theoretical aspect of it, but I'm sure the practical aspect, like the other doctor was explaining, I'm sure it's Dr. David, if I'm not wrong, the occipital, you need to have an understanding of how that head feels, especially with a spinal cord injury patient, or what is the limitations of the movement. I would be really hesitant to go to get myself treated with someone who has just an online education. And if the board is going to approve it, I would really recommend them stating that certificate should state that education was achieved through online education and not hands-on. Because when I go and ask my chiropractor if they have additional knowledge, I would like to see that certificate telling what kind of knowledge was gained and what was the mode of education they achieved that knowledge through. So I would strongly encourage, that's fine, they can go and have an online education, but please let that certificate state that it was given online. We don't want everybody to assume that education was achieved hands-on. So there are certain nuances that needs to be learned hands-on, and as a consumer, I would strongly encourage the board to look into that aspect or not just go by what the doctors say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
And we have an additional request for comment from Marcus Stratz. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to what the last gentleman said, and I understand what you're saying, but we did all the hands-on in school, and as Dr. Daniel said, we already know how to adjust. We are just adding skill sets. There are many technique classes where it's pure lecture and there are not hands-on. We haven't even mentioned that this afternoon, where doctors will lecture and lecture and lecture. Currently, you can actually get your technique through online learning by reading through PowerPoint presentations and booklets and getting that way. And that's how we learned in school as well. We read through books and then we did hands-on. This is a 2-hour seminar. There is not a maneuver you will master in 2 hours. That's not possible. So this is going to be informing the doctor on how to do this. They get together with other people after the fact and they practice and practice and practice. And it takes 10,000 times to master a maneuver. It doesn't happen in 2 hours. So I understand what the last gentleman was saying, but to learn to adjust does not happen in 2 hours and never has and never will. Again, I think Dr. Daniel's comments are spot on this, and this should be an option. And again, they can go to more. They could take 100 hours of technique if they wanted to improve, and they can work with their fellow chiropractors in their offices for hundreds of hours. That's what we did, and that's how we got to be master adjusters, not by going to a 2-hour seminar and setting it up on 3 or 4 different segments. Thank you.
And I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Please, thank you.
Thank you.
So is there any further discussion from the committee members? So it sounds to me like perhaps we might entertain a motion from the committee to direct staff to draft language based on the general framework here. And then perhaps one of the committee members would like to include the last discussion on removing the in-person requirement in that motion.
I'm happy to make that motion.
Would you like to restate it as your motion?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to motion that we direct the staff to continue on this. I think we have a great framework here to draft the regulatory language going forward that will be more specific for future discussion and voting, and to amend the language in there for related to competency 3 that to drop the requirement for competency 3 to be in person exclusively. Did I confuse you, Ms. Knight?
Only slightly, but I believe, no, I think we have it. So your motion would be to direct staff to amend the current language to allow for virtual type of Zoom education and not to make it exclusively in person.
Well, we've already addressed that in other language that this is just the one caveat for competency 3.
Sorry, I left out competency 3 in that. Yes, yes.
So all the other areas of Zoom is going to be an option we had previously, but I would recommend the staff that we drop that competency 2 is required to be in person.
May I make a friendly suggestion?
Sure.
That as long as we're having staff develop the language, that we consider using one of the 3 categories of learning formats for CE, and define if we want the competency 3 to fall under either in-person learning experience, live and interactive courses given via electronic means, or distance learning, or that it can be satisfied with.
I agree. I'm glad you said that. I think that technique should not be distance learning as it is right now. You can get your technique through distance learning. I think it should be either in person or live via video conferencing and be excluded from distance learning. I agree with that.
I agree. I think there needs to be that live component, not on demand.
Correct. How about that, Ms. Knight? Does that clarify it?
Even better, more detail, the better. So if you're going to agree to that amendment to your motion, then we would entertain a second.
And Kristen, how does that, do you feel you have sufficient for what I'm putting in this motion for direction for you guys? Because I think the framework we have right now looks great. I think this is a great backbone to build on.
We have sufficient direction. Just one point of clarification, because we've been talking about competency 3 and limiting that to the in-person or the live interactive. Does the committee, for the other competency areas, when we're talking about mandatory hours, do you want the same requirement, or can the other competencies that are mandated be completed through distance learning? Keeping in mind that distance learning has been redefined as meaning asynchronous coursework, not in real time.
Yeah, I personally am comfortable. Go ahead. Sorry, David.
No, please.
I was going to say I'm comfortable with the other competencies being accomplished through distance learning, as well as to be able to be covered in all 3 learning mediums that you've outlined before: distance, live video conferencing, and in person. And technique being live video conferencing or in person, not distance learning, is my intent.
Sorry, so now I'm confused. I thought the first section, the 10 hours, the 4, the 2, and the 2, and the 2, the competencies 1 through 4 were in-person or live video conferencing, and then the other 14 could be distance learning. Is that? I thought that's how that was structured, no?
Or live.
I think that's what we're discussing right at this moment, yeah.
If I may interject.
Yes.
So just to clarify, so of the 4 competencies that are mandated, there's been discussion by the committee in the past, and then there's a motion to amend that and it only related to competency 3 in the adjustment. And that would be, traditionally it had to be in person. Now we're talking about making it in person or live or interactive. For the other 3 competency areas, that's where I was seeking clarification, but there hasn't been any formal discussion from the committee on mandating that be live or in person. As it presently stands in that language, those other 3 competency areas could be through any of those learning types. So I was just seeking clarification when we bring that language back. So we could either amend that or we could bring it back with those competencies 1, 2, and 4 can be completed in any learning format. Competency 3 must be either live, interactive, or in person.
That's my understanding. We have not had discussion in the past about changing that. There are many providers out there that and I've taken those courses that have been done on demand that satisfy my required, as well as taking it in person. I usually take it in person, but there is the option there to do it on demand, and that's been the case since the beginning of when CEs were allowed to be on demand.
My suggestion would simply be that while we're able to potentially strengthen the quality of the only other competency 1 is really the only other area that might be strengthened by having it in-person learning or live and interactive courses given via electronic means, so that 1 and 3 would be equivalent. And that would include, because competency 1 actually includes face-to-face interaction with the patient, it includes physical exam, it includes history, all of the decision-making process, including kind of the newer ideas around contextual factors and things like that. So, but mostly just in regards to the aspects of physical exam and orthopedic testing, et cetera, which our profession is very heavy into. So my friendly suggestion would be that maybe we consider having competencies 1 and 3 both reflect not being able to do those via distance learning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think 1 and 3 for sure, there needs to be some interaction, live interaction, meaning Zoom or in person. I think you need to, even though you're not in front of me physically, Dr. Adams, I have much more context than I do in watching a video. So I think some of these requirements with the option of, with all the changes in the world, with the options of in-person and live video conferencing, but not distance learning for 1 and 3. But I don't have an issue with record keeping or documentation being included in the distance learning. So I think I'm on the same mind as you, Dr. Paris, on that.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it supports the trend towards telehealth also. It gives us assurances that, as we move into virtual evaluation and management, virtual exams and telehealth, that, I think that supports some of that learning.
Well, then I have no problem with that either. I think just having those options is good. So the motion would be that directing staff to continue on this language, and then competencies 1 and 3 are achieved through in-person or live video conferencing, and competencies 2 and 4 can be achieved, or 2, 4, and 5 can be achieved through all 3 mediums. Does that clarify it for you, Kristen and Ms. Knight?
It does. Thank you.
Yes, very much. Thank you for that amended motion, and then we'll entertain a second for that amended motion.
I would second that with just a clarification that there's no competency 5. So it would just be 2 and 4, if that's Not in this. Oh, you mean you're including, I'm sorry. Let me take that back.
It's the electives.
Yeah, it's the electives. Okay, I was just thinking of the.
Yeah, the electives can be
Yes.
with all three mediums.
Mind eraser what I just said. Let me be a second to that motion.
Great, and then we would like to hear some public comment on this motion before we take a vote.
Please, moderator, will you open for public comment?
Certainly, and we've opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. You can look for the question mark icon in the lower right corner or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. Type the word comment and click send. The other option is to, my apologies, to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And in the interest of time, at this point, we are limiting it to comments from 1 comment per person. Are there any comments on this agenda item? Well, apparently there are no comments, so I can close the Q&A if you'd like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, would you please call for the vote on that motion?
Dr. Paris?
Yes.
Dr. Adams? Yes. Yes. Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I would like to table agenda item number 6 into our next meeting. And Ms. Knight, do I need a motion for that?
Say that again. I was closing my book and I did not hear everything that you said.
I was requesting that we table agenda item number 6 until our next meeting.
That's fine without a motion.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to table agenda item number 6 and move on to agenda item number 7. Public comment for items not on the agenda. And Ms. Walker, have any written comments been submitted?
We received 2 written comments from Dr. Strutz on this agenda, and then actually it was on agenda item number 6. So we'll bring those to the committee at the next meeting.
Great, thank you. Members of the public, you may address the committee at this time. Identifying yourself as voluntary, and your name will be recorded in the official minutes of the meeting if it is provided at the time of your comment. So moderator, can we please open this up for public comment?
Certainly. We've opened up the Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. And the other option would be to raise your hand. And we do have one request for Marcus Strutz. I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. So that was good that we got that through. So on item 6, extremely concerned. I guess that's starting January 1st, where it's $116 an hour, and that needs to be paid attention to because all these courses that we're renewing, that we renewed forever. I just crunched the numbers and I sent it out to Kristen Walker and the board members. The fees I will be paying will go from $3,200 a year to $30,000 a year. If anyone thinks that's fair and right, they probably shouldn't be making decisions. That is unbelievably egregious, and that needs to be changed as soon as possible because those will be fees that just are insurmountable for not just myself, but all the other providers. And one of the things that's going to happen is you'll see fewer courses provided. So when we're talking about someone who's trying to make up their license and they have to go to all these different courses, they may not be there because providers simply won't be able to afford to pay $700 for a 6-hour course. Chiropractors pay $313 for their license, and they can adjust as many people as they want with that one fee. And we're being I don't know, wrongly charged for this service, and it's just it's outrageous. And being as polite as I can, but it is a huge disservice to the CE providers. And it's truly sad that that got pushed through without any ability to say no to it or have this type of public discussion that we're having currently. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
And there are no further requests for public comment on items not on the agenda.
Okay, moderator, you can close
Thank you.
that. Moving to agenda item number 8, future agenda items. And just like to open it to the committee for any discussion on any future agenda items for this committee.
I think agenda item 6 is part of what the last public comment was about, and I think we're going to be addressing that at the next meeting. So hopefully that'll be carried over. And I know, Kristen, from previous discussions, we've had feedback from schools and from our state organization about the fees being higher than they feel that they can handle. And that it may be up to speed on, because I see that the Roth bill passed, so those fees go into effect on January 1 of 2023. And we were working at the possibility of changing the language or having the change adapted that they would be up to 116 as opposed to going right up to 116. Is that something that's still being looked into?
That's broadly covered under agenda item 6. That was that's tabled to the December 2nd meeting unless the committee is available to meet before that.
Okay.
Ms. Walker, I had a question. How the current fee is $56, and how many years has it been set at that fee?
I believe it was set at that fee in 2019, beginning of 2019.
So for almost 4 years, there's been no adjustment in the fee?
That's correct.
So we're not even keeping pace with CPI?
Correct. Yeah, we can't discuss too far into the fees under this agenda item, but that's all under that agenda item 6 that needs.
Great.
I would just clarify one thing, having worked with the CCA, that $56 fee predates 2019. It goes back a while, I'm pretty sure, because I remember as a president of our association, our local association, we were getting continuing education approved, and I think it does predate that. I think it goes back further than 2019, but I could be wrong on that. But I'm pretty confident with that. So.
Are there any more future agenda items?
Can I add quickly about the fees? This is Amanda. The fees were previously adopted with the current CE regs in 2012, and before the fee increase in 2019, it was $51, I believe.
It was close. Sorry.
Are there any more future agenda items from the committee members?
None for me.
Okay. I have one. I would like to see us agendize consideration and discussion around biennial CE renewal. And that's all I have there. And moderator, can we open this agenda item for public comment?
One final thing, David, before we go on, we probably ought to look at trying to set a CE committee meeting up a little sooner. Maybe just pick that one agenda and have discussion on it, a short lunchtime thing at some point. Maybe have direct staff to send out a doodle pool or whatever that, do they call that, doodle, whatever it is, that maybe we just, spend 30, 40 minutes on item 6. I don't know if we need more than that, but we probably should address that prior to January 1st.
We can do that. Thank you. We'll consider.
And I have opened up the Q&A feature of WebEx for public comment. And we do have one request for comment from Marcus Strutz. And Marcus, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to urge the board to have an earlier meeting than December for item 6 so it can get resolved and moved on, because those fees are just insane. And and I know this all takes time. So the fact that it got implemented so quickly is shocking. And I'm at a loss for why Zoom takes 2 years to get pushed through, and an item that directly punishes the CE providers gets pushed through in a matter of a couple months. It's truly a sad thing. But hopefully you guys can act and change that sooner versus waiting for December and so forth. So I urge you and beg you to change that.
And I see no other requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Please, and thank you for the continued comments and interaction here today. Moving to agenda item number 9, which is adjournment. I would like to adjourn the meeting at 2:17 p.m. and meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.